The Devil's Footprints. It was the winter of 1855, and Devon was gripped by an unforgiving cold that seeped into our very bones. Snow had fallen the night before, thick and heavy, blanketing the village in an eerie silence. By morning, the world seemed cleansed, pure, but it didn't take long for that illusion to shatter. I had been in the local pub with some of the lads when old Thomas burst in, pale as a ghost, eyes wide with terror. His voice was barely more than a whisper, but it cut through the low murmur like a knife. "Something's out there," he stammered, pointing a trembling finger toward the door. We all rushed outside, following him through the snow-covered streets until we reached the edge of the village. There, in the untouched snow, were the strangest marks I had ever seen. Hoof-like prints, sharp and deep, as if something heavy and unnatural had pressed down with immense force. The strangest part was how the prints seemed to stretch in a perfect line, unbroken, no matter the obstacle. "What beast leaves prints like these?" John muttered beside me, his breath fogging in the icy air. No one answered. We were all thinking the same thing: no beast from this world. The prints led through walls, over rooftops, across frozen rivers. Some of us dared to follow, curiosity overtaking fear, though with every step, the air seemed to grow colder, heavier, as if the very atmosphere was warning us to turn back. But we didn't listen. We came upon a farmstead on the outskirts of the village. The tracks led right to the door, which hung ajar, swinging gently in the wind. Inside, the silence was deafening. We called out, but no one answered. The prints continued through the house, up the stairs, and into the bedroom where we found them. The family, father, mother, and two small children, lay in their beds, as if peacefully asleep. But their eyes were wide open, staring into nothingness, their faces twisted in a grotesque expression of terror. Blood trickled from their mouths, staining the sheets in dark crimson. Whatever had taken them, it had been quick, merciless. "God help us," I heard someone whisper behind me, but there was no comfort in those words. Not here. Not now. We left the house in silence, our minds reeling with what we had seen. The tracks led on, further into the woods that bordered the village. As we ventured deeper into the forest, the shadows seemed to grow longer, darker, swallowing the light of the dying day. Then, all at once, the prints stopped. Right in the middle of the clearing, as if whatever made them had simply vanished into thin air. We stood there in the quiet, each of us lost in our thoughts. But just as I turned to suggest we head back, a sound pierced the stillness, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from all around us. The trees began to creak and groan as if they were alive, bending toward us. Panic set in, and we ran, but no matter how fast we moved, the sound followed us, growing louder, closer, until it was right behind us. I turned, just for a second, and I saw it. A shadow, tall and twisted, with eyes that burned like embers in the dark. It smiled at me, a smile that chilled me to my core, full of malice and hunger. We bolted from the clearing, fear gnawing at our insides, our breaths coming out in ragged gasps. The woods seemed to close in around us, the trees warping into grotesque shapes in the fading light. Behind us, that growl lingered, more menacing than before, and with every step, the shadow seemed closer, creeping along the edges of our vision. We didn't stop until we reached the village outskirts, panting, drenched in sweat despite the freezing air. When we finally slowed, we realized we had lost two of the group, Thomas and John. Panic surged through us again, but no one dared to go back into those cursed woods. Instead, we headed to the church, our only refuge. Father Mathers greeted us at the door, his face creased with worry as he took in our terrified expressions. We told him everything: the hoof prints, the dead family, the shadow in the woods. He listened in silence, his face growing paler with each word. "These are not the doings of a mere beast," he said at last, crossing himself. "This is something far worse, something unholy." He led us inside, where the warmth of the church offered little comfort. The shadows of the flickering candles danced across the stone walls, casting strange shapes that seemed to move on their own. Father Mathers gathered us in front of the altar, clutching his rosary tightly as he began to pray, his voice trembling slightly. But as the words left his lips, something else crept in, an icy draft that snuffed out the candles, plunging us into darkness. The door to the church creaked open, and a frigid gust of wind howled through the nave, carrying with it a whisper, faint but unmistakable. A single word, repeated over and over, "Leave." Panic erupted among us. Some rushed to relight the candles, others huddled together, murmuring desperate prayers. But then we heard it again, the growl, low and resonant, echoing from the dark corners of the church. The very walls seemed to tremble with its sound. And then came the scream. A blood-curdling cry that shattered the air, sending us all reeling. It came from the back of the church, from the direction of the crypt. Without thinking, we rushed toward the source, but what we found made my heart stop cold. John was there, crumpled on the stone floor, his eyes wide open, staring into nothingness, just like the family we had found. His mouth hung open, twisted in an expression of unspeakable terror, and blood trickled from his ears. But there was something else, something carved into his forehead, jagged and deep, as if by a clawed hand. It was a symbol, a cross turned upside down, surrounded by strange, arcane markings. None of us could look away, horror freezing us in place. The growl was louder now, reverberating through the stone walls, and it felt as though the church itself was breathing, pulsing with some dark, malevolent force. Father Mathers stood frozen at the altar, his rosary dangling from his trembling hand. This is the work of the devil," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Before anyone could respond, the church doors slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping us inside. The temperature plummeted, our breath misting in the air. The growling intensified, and then, from the shadows, we saw them, cloven footprints, appearing one by one on the stone floor, leading straight toward us. Something was here with us, unseen but undeniable. It moved among us, its presence felt in every corner, in every breath. And then the whisper returned, louder this time, almost deafening. "Leave." The words seemed to wrap around us, choking the very air from our lungs. We stumbled back, desperate to escape, but there was nowhere to go. The growl grew into a roar, and the shadows coalesced into a shape, a twisted, hulking figure, its eyes burning with hellfire, its mouth curling into that same sickening smile I had seen in the woods. It lunged at us, faster than we could react, and the last thing I saw before everything went black was Father Mathers falling to his knees, clutching his chest, a look of sheer terror on his face. The shadows engulfed him, and then, nothing. When I awoke, the church was silent. The cold had receded, but the air was thick with an overwhelming sense of dread. I looked around and saw the others, sprawled across the floor, slowly stirring, as if waking from a nightmare. But Father Mathers was gone, along with John's body. All that remained were the cloven footprints, leading away into the night. And the whisper, "Leave." Whatever had come for us, it wasn't finished. Not yet. We were shaken to our core, haunted by what we had seen in that church. The whispers, the shadow, the growl, it was as if we had been marked by something far beyond our understanding. No one spoke much after that night. The village fell into a hushed, fearful silence, as though even acknowledging what had happened would bring it back. But we couldn't ignore the footprints. Every morning, they reappeared, weaving through the village in that impossibly straight line, cutting through walls, crossing rooftops, and always vanishing into the woods. And with each passing day, more of us went missing. First, it was Thomas, then Margaret, then little Abigail. They would disappear overnight, their homes eerily quiet, their beds cold by the time we found them. But there were never any signs of struggle, only the hoof-like prints leading away into the dark. We were desperate now, clinging to any shred of hope. Father Mathers was gone, but we still had his words ringing in our ears: "This is the work of the devil." And so, we did the only thing we could think of: we prepared for battle, as absurd as that sounded. A few of us gathered weapons, old hunting rifles, axes, anything that could offer some semblance of protection. But deep down, we knew none of it would matter. The nights grew longer, the air heavier, and the fear palpable. Then came the night that everything changed, the night we decided to follow the footprints into the woods one last time, determined to end whatever curse had befallen our village. We set out in silence, our breaths clouding the cold night air, the crunch of snow beneath our boots the only sound. The footprints led us deeper and deeper into the forest, far beyond where we had ventured before. The trees loomed over us, their gnarled branches twisting into unnatural shapes, as if reaching for us, trying to pull us back. But we pressed on, driven by desperation and fear. The forest grew darker, thicker, until we came upon a clearing, a perfect circle in the midst of the trees. In the center of that clearing stood a solitary figure, cloaked in shadow, its back to us. The footprints led directly to it, and for a moment, none of us dared to move. Then it turned. What we saw in that moment will haunt me until my last breath. The figure was not human, not anymore. Its face was a grotesque mask of twisted flesh, its eyes burning with an unnatural fire, its mouth curling into a grin that spoke of endless torment and malevolent glee. And the horns, long, curved, black as night, jutted from its forehead, framing that hideous smile. But what truly froze my blood was what hung from its hand, a chain, long and rusted, attached to a bundle of something, someone. I squinted, and as the moonlight broke through the clouds, I saw it clearly. It was Margaret. Her lifeless body dangled from the chain like a puppet, her limbs limp, her head lolled to one side, eyes wide and empty. And she wasn't alone. Behind the creature, I could make out more bodies, all of them hanging from similar chains, swaying gently in the cold wind. Thomas, Abigail, Father Mathers, they were all there, their faces twisted in the same expression of pure, unrelenting terror. One of us screamed, and that was when it happened. The creature moved with inhuman speed, covering the distance between us in the blink of an eye. It was upon us before we could even react, its hands, those long, clawed hands, reaching out, grabbing, tearing. I don't know how I survived. Maybe it was luck, maybe it was something else, but in the chaos, I stumbled back, tripping over roots and crashing through the trees. I ran. I ran like I had never run before, the growl echoing in my ears, the sound of flesh being ripped apart behind me. When I finally burst out of the woods and into the village, I collapsed, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked back, expecting to see the creature following, but the woods were still. Silent. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw them, the footprints. They led away from the woods, back into the village, crisscrossing through the streets, weaving through houses. And then I saw where they ended.